Now, the number of coronavirus cases in Singapore has grown to 75, with 3 new confirmed cases yesterday. 2 of the new cases are linked to the Grace Assembly of God Church. One of them is a 43-year-old regular serviceman in the Singapore Armed Forces. The church is now the biggest cluster with 18 confirmed cases. Of the 75 patients here, 19 have recovered. Most of the rest are stable or improving, but 5 are in critical condition. Meanwhile, the death toll from the coronavirus outbreak in mainland China is now more than 1,770, up by 105 from the previous day. There were over 2,000 new cases reported in China yesterday, putting the total number of infections to over 70,400. Nearly 90% of the new cases were in Wuhan. But the number of new cases in Hubei province had been declining since a large spike last week when officials changed their criteria for counting cases to include people diagnosed through lung imaging. Elizabeth Law, China correspondent for the Straits Times. Good to have you back, Liz.
Hi, Olivia.
Hi. Well, so Liz, the head of the Le Shenshan Hospital in Hubei said that the virus has reached a turning point with a dip in the number of severely ill patients. Do you think that's really the case, though?
Well, I think we should be very careful when looking at numbers like this for a couple of reasons. Well, number one is that even though, yes, there has been a dip in the number of severely ill patients, we bear in mind the fact is that there are still new infections every day, there are still new deaths. So I think we should be wary of saying that the virus has reached a dip. And this also comes, just as the WHO has said, it is very hard to predict the future of this virus. And so this is something that we just have to bear in mind as well. And lastly, I think as I've said before last time I was up here, I said that Chinese officials have been reporting a dip in cases throughout mainland China, except for Hubei province. And so we have to be mindful that, you know, in a country where things depend a lot on this sort of number, this sort of quantitative numbers as a benchmark of performance, and we all know what happened in Hebei province before this whole outbreak really exploded. We just have to be very mindful whether or not how clean this data that we're looking at is.
Right. Well, in Beijing, it said that all returning to the capital city will have to quarantine themselves for 14 days, while Hubei province has banned vehicles from traveling on the roads. Do you think these measures may be a bit too drastic?
Well, it is quite drastic. It is very severe. But the thing is that, you know, in China, they are really quite fond of the big gestures, and because it is just such a large country, this is necessary. Now, let's talk about these two places. Maybe first let's talk about Hubei province, because this is the epicenter of the outbreak. We saw Wuhan city getting locked down, unprecedented in the world. After that, more cities around Wuhan, same thing happened, and people were banned from leaving their houses. So what difference is this from what has been going on since January 21st? I beg your pardon, January 23rd. So what is different now is that previously people were allowed to still use their delivery apps and order food, order groceries to their homes, or people, if you wanted to, you could still go out in your car and go to the nearby market, go to a supermarket to try and buy food. But with these new measures, it just means that unless you are in charge of essential services like medicine, medical services, ambulances, or you were a specialized delivery person, you will not be able to leave your house. Does this prevent even more people from going out? Yes, it does. But is this really going to help in the long run? I don't know, we can only hope for the best. Now, to go back to Beijing, why this is important for Beijing is because one of the biggest things that people worried about was that as everyone was going back into the capital city after the Chinese New Year holidays, there was going to be a huge wave of people coming back from all over China, not just Hubei province. Now, the virus is something that has spread throughout the country, and they are worried of imported cases from the rest of the province because there's just so many people in Beijing. It's just a mega city. And so by doing this, it's really the only way possible for them to try and contain the spread of the virus, because you can't tell people you cannot come back to Beijing. This is the capital city of China. You can't ban people from coming back to work. So this is probably the best way that they can try to manage the entire situation.
Well, much of China returned to work today after an extended holiday. So what are we seeing in the country?
Well, we are seeing companies come back online. We are seeing so what I spoke about last week was that this is probably going to be the biggest telecommuting experiment in the entire world, because this is it's just such a massive country. Well, in the lead up to this, last week we've seen editorials in various newspapers questioning whether or not how good would this entire work from home thing be. Well, we already know that in the beginning, educators, teachers and students were complaining about e-learning, because firstly, the teachers aren't super used to it, unlike in Singapore where it is really a big part of the curriculum. Teachers there weren't quite used to it. So there was a report in which a teacher said, I feel like a subpar live blogger, because they were just not used to how to set up the camera and how to talk to their students. And when you can't see your students, it really is quite hard to teach. So we know that they weren't really big on e-learning, but of course it is necessary. And people were saying that, working from home, like a lot of us have been doing at the Straits Times, it is quite easy to get distracted. Or when you live with other family members, they do expect you to, hey, you're at home, why don't you help out with the housework? So those are quite a few things that I think it's kinks that the Chinese workforce has to try and iron out. And one very, very important thing before I go is that China has a very unique, a more traditional sort of workplace culture where they believe that you have to be there at the beck and call of your boss. You know that there is just this whole dynamic to it, which telecommuting doesn't really help. So I think that is something that will have to change if going forward they really do want to get in the age of telecommuting, and during this period as they try and overcome this outbreak.
Right. Fantastic points that you raised up, Liz. Thank you so much. I've been speaking to China correspondent for the Straits Times, Elizabeth Law. Keep up to date with the global coronavirus outbreak at straitstimes.com.